remember games like Age of Empires and Empire Earth. Aside of Doom, a big chunk of my childhood was basically being able to enjoy these games, at least all by myself without the need to compete with an actual human player. I was able to, all by myself, build civilizations worth the test of time, that is, without no one to compete with other than a clumsy easy mode AI, and that was where, when I decided to play against someone real, where I had seemingly my greatest mistake. I was in an internet cafe where Empire Earth was installed, and the owner of the place was a very cool dude. He decided to play with me a small game of Empire Earth, and me, enthusiastic for having my first time competing in a strategy game against an actual human player, I accepted such challenge. So the match went on like this. I slowly was building my base back in the first literal technological age, trying to develop literally everything and build literally everything kinda clumsily, when all of a sudden my opponent's army, which was at several technological ages way ahead of me, started invading me, wrecking everything I built with my tribesman civilization, and I lost the match. The advice my opponent, the owner of the internet cafe, could give me at all is that I needed to farm just enough resources as quick as possible to advance to the later ages and then quickly build an advanced tech army as soon as you hit far enough with those ages. I felt like I was blown apart. I felt bullied by someone who seemingly grinded fast and long enough to crush my tiny prehistoric civilization who was just barely getting started on getting on track. I didn't even know back then, but now I will assume that's how the reality of strategy games is, based on a toxic idea of crushing inferior civilizations who could not get ahead on your false myth of progress. And you know what I now think of that idea? I think this basic concept of speedrunning into getting ahead technologically of your opponent like that is kind of related to something I despise under the system of capitalism. You already seen the title, you think this is going to be a JMAA brand of shit take, but I'm going to say it. Strategy games have something to do with colonialism. Now, before I go with anything at all, I just want to preface this by saying that this video in no way implies anything in the lines of that strategy video games are racist or that strategy video games are colonialist. Many right-wing pundits will be quick to point that strawman out while saying, "Wow, I can't believe this crybaby bitch is gonna complain about how strategy games are racist or something." They're not. A lot of video games, including strategy ones, have evolved in such a way that they don't necessarily cater to racist ideologies or even colonialist ideologies. Game developer teams have become more diverse not just in identity, but also in thought. And I'm thankful for a video game scene where at least diversity is taken in mind. However, this is here to imply that these strategy games are built indirectly, at least on concepts that our capitalist or colonialist society have established since literal ages ago. This is kind of a way to tell, don't blame the player, blame the game kind of thing. Or rather, don't blame the games we make, blame the whole system we're building these games under. We've been living so well accustomed to the side effects of colonialism in our modern society so much that fighting against it is nearly futile, so we can all just sit here and get used to it. But I'm not saying to give up. There can be a lot more better games built around ideas that are not necessarily directly or indirectly inspired by our current post-colonialist or post-feudal capitalist society. And I'm here to maybe inspire some future game developers to know why these strategy games came to be derivatives of our post-colonialist society and how to make games that don't imply those colonialist ideas at all. So, I think this is going to be a really long one. Let's start by the big ones, and the ones that will get my ass kicked more than ever. The Age of Empires and Empire Earth franchises. They kinda set a bit of a standard on historical real-time strategy games, given that they are pretty much based on real history and not, made up fantasy stories. But let's go back to the time where I got my ass beaten by my internet cafe opponent in games like these, especially in the Age of Empires and Empire Earth brand of strategy genres. In order to get advantage over an opponent, whether it is an AI or a human, you have to be not just having the biggest army of them all, you also have to be more technologically advanced than your opponents, and that means not only advancing in tech eras from the High Middle Ages in Age of Empires 2 to the Imperial Age, or from the Stone Age in Age of Empires to the Golden Age, or from the Stone Age in Empire Earth to the modern day sci-fi age with robots and shit, but it also means researching a lot of technologies like, say, printing press, agriculture, steel forging, nanotechnology, nuclear science. All of those ideas are of technological progress, do not come from nowhere, and bear with me on this. These technological progresses come from the very white patriarchal idea of progress. Age of Empires 2, for instance, happens mostly in medieval Europe, sometimes in Asia or Africa, but mostly in medieval European societies, where they are mainly dominated by white European societies with white-centric ideas of technological progress. In the conqueror's expansion of Age of Empires 2 in America, the indigenous campaign ends up with the complete annihilation of their own civilization by the Spanish invaders. Now, I'm not here to say that these games should not be this historically accurate, but the most depressing thing is to know that the civilization you're playing with is treated like a bunch of savages who, regardless of their own technological advances, such as the basic idea of their own calendar, discovering cocoa first ever, and their own ideas of astrology, who were basically minding their own business in America until the Spanish arrived and had no other alternative than to just being an extinct civilization. And yes, granted, a lot of ancient civilizations end up extinct. Look up the Egyptians or the Romans, pretty much the very definition of Ozymandias. But there's still a lot of possibilities to explore not so fatalistic outcomes for such civilizations. Age of Empires 3 literally treats indigenous people like neutral creatures with no other purpose other than being used by other more advanced civilizations, ignoring the fact that these indigenous tribes had their own fights and history that will be equal to that of white Eurocentric civilizations. And Age of Empires 3 is more evident about its colonialist themes than any other game in the franchise, and they all come to the same gameplay core: to get into more advanced technological progress than your inferior opponents. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean you cannot beat someone who is on a more advanced technological age than you, given that it also depends on your skill and numbers mostly. But this toxic idea, while not exactly the fault of those developing the game at Ensemble Studios or Microsoft, of treating those who are not ahead of your technology as inferior, who could easily be beaten and crushed like ants, is, and I'm sorry, a very fascistic idea. Now, it's obvious to say that more turn-based strategy games like Civilization had also their own impact in the gaming scene. But in terms of the same colonialist or capitalist themes these games present, Civilization games had it equally as bad or much worse. For starters, the whole basis of playing a typical Civilization game is that you can win in a way more ways than your average Age of Empires or Empire Earth game. You can beat everybody not just by crushing them militarily, but you can make alliances with other civilizations and achieve so-called world peace. You can reach the apex of technological research and be the first person who reaches space. You can win culturally by being the top cultural reference in the world, but this implies the same kind of fascistic idea of having to crush everyone else, either way as inferiors as anything in this colonialist or capitalist era. Your allies are not allies, they're useful idiots willing to serve you for your purpose of achieving world peace by yourself. And if anybody disagrees with you and starts a war with you, you gotta crush them like grapes or be crushed like grapes. Don't even get me started on the idea that some of the Civilization games, especially the earlier ones or ones like Call to Power, have slavery, and that you can also have slave states or cities. It's quite problematic. While it's true that in civilization games you don't necessarily play always with white-centric civilizations, and that you can play with, say, Egyptians or Zulus or even Indians or American indigenous civilizations, it's still a problem that the basic core gameplay of these games is always about being superior to other civilizations, either culturally, militarily, scientifically, or even in terms of how many allies you got. Now, obviously these games are not the only ones with these imperialistic or colonialist ideas. These are based on board games such as Seven Wonders or Catan, but they equally indirectly promote these toxic imperialist and colonialist ideas through the better gameplay at least. And this isn't exclusive to historically accurate games like these. Let's move to the big elephant in the room, Blizzard, who are more specialized in fantasy games than historically accurate ones. You will argue that these fantasy games don't necessarily reflect our history or society, but I disagree. These ideas of these fantasy games are an indirect product of our current society and history more than you think. A lot of the events on games like Warcraft or Starcraft has similitudes to that of historic events in our real world, as in that a character like Lord Garithos in Warcraft 3 will be a Warcraft equivalent of a racist dictator who's hellbent on segregating races like elves for no other reason than spite. Or how about the very idea of a Terran society that is not just militaristic, but also nearly fascistic, especially in games like StarCraft 2, is quite similar to that of a puritanical United States, or at least, or a fascist Nazi Germany at most. Yeah, pretty scary, huh? It's not just that, but the Warcraft games, the RTS ones and not World of Warcraft, they imply very heavy imperialistic and colonialist themes masqueraded as a fantasy theme. We all know modern fantasy settings like those in Warcraft are always a derivation of fantasy settings of J.R.R. Tolkien, you know, the author of Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, The Silmarillion, etc. In Warcraft 2 at least, it's always about either the humans, who are always suspiciously white passing of course, or either about the savage orcs and trolls, orcs whose idea is based out of Tolkien's orcs, who are supposed to be Tolkien's racist representations of savage people of African descent. Yikes. I'm not here to necessarily say Tolkien was a racist or that Blizzard is racist, even though Tolkien had the same racist mindset than anyone of his time and age, of World War II, and that is to World War II what J.K. Rowling is to our current day. But these imperialist, colonialist, and racist ideas of orcs being savage and humans being civilized has not just been perpetuated in Warcraft games, but also in general modern fantasy settings. And the gameplay of these games, as simplistic as it might be, is the same deal, but worse. You have to crush your opponent like a bug. Have bigger resources, bigger research, bigger armies, bigger numbers, and hence more power than your opponent. StarCraft games have been more of the same really. I imagine they're pretty much giving Starship Troopers vibes on how the Terran society claims supremacy on savage alien races like the Zerg or Protoss. These alien races are claimed as inferior to the Terran, often viewed as opponents to the Terran, in the same way than in the Warcraft games, but with a sci-fi setting, you have to crush them. Have more resources, more research, more armies, more numbers, and more power. It's tiring. It's really tiring compared to the other previous games I mentioned, that it's all about literally destroying physically the opponent in this sort of competitive setting. At least in Civilization games or Age of Empires games, you can still win by either being culturally superior, having world peace, or building a wonder that will stand the test of time, which are more peaceful ways of defeating your opponent without meaning to literally hurt them. But here, in either Warcraft or Starcraft RTS games, is all about the colonialist, brutalist idea of destroying your opponent until nothing about them is left other than their ashes. It's just tiresome. And here we probably come to the worst offender of them all, the Command & Conquer series, especially Red Alert, which is pretty much an exaggerated caricature. In the Red Alert series, it's all about communism bad, and how the mighty allies are going to save the world from this literal Soviet Bond villains. Granted, these anti-communist sentiments have their roots in the 80s and 90s, with America being ruled by either Reagan or Bill Clinton, who have particularly very anti-communist ideas, pretty much like the entire United States society. But even though I'm just an anarchist who doesn't agree with totalitarian Marxist ideas, communist ideas are painted here with a broad brush of how Soviets are these unidimensional villains who have Tesla coils, mind control, and time machines, and are hellbent on taking over the world. Let's just ignore that the Imperial Japanese exist in Wrath of the Earth 3. The Allies, however, are portrayed as the superior good guys who defend American values and are here to save the world from communism bad. Not to mention that the games exploit images of scantily clad women and how every United States president in those games is an old white dude. Like, they can't even fathom the idea that a guy like Obama existed despite anything. It's like basically a white baby slut fight all the time. This rather black and white view of political morality, which is based on post-colonialist capitalist ideas, is incredibly biased to say the least, and it's often exaggerated to the point of caricature. It's laughable, and this is even worse. So we come to our final point of this long thesis. What could we do as gamers and game developers to explore less colonialistic and imperialistic ideas of gameplay and stories? Well, yes, we're trapped in a post-colonialist capitalism. There's still room to explore less of these capitalistic and colonialist ideas and having more nuanced views on stories about all civilizations. A game I pretty much like a lot that doesn't necessarily imply supremacist themes of colonialist or imperialist domination is something like Crusader Kings 2. Yes, this is still a game about medieval ages, which were mostly feudalistic, but these sorts of games like Crusader Kings 2 or Hearts of Iron 4 are not necessarily about crushing opponents or being superior to one another. These games are not about the destination, they are about the journey. And these games explore more the gameplay core of having interesting stories to tell during the course of your dynasty or civilization than just destroying other civilizations or beating other civilizations. Even if you're a non-white dynasty like that of the Arabians or the Northern Africans, every civilization has the same equal capacity of being played to create equally interesting stories about that civilization. And we need to explore more themes like that, something that treats every civilization as equal and no one is superior to another. The idea of progress as implied by the colonialist society is a myth perpetrated mainly by white male dudes. And we already come a long way too long to perpetuate that still. Let's change. Let's be equal. Have a strategy game where you can win, but you can't either lose, but still where you can create fascinating stories no matter who you are. Let's just grow up and evolve as equally humans.
Burger King.